This is Curious Minnesota, a Star Tribune project that sends staff from the state's largest newsroom hunting for the answers to great questions we receive from you. We're here to answer everything you want to know about the state's people, places, and culture. I'm your host, Erica Pearson. Today, we're going back to 1949 when a young boy named Jim Miner was standing by the bank of the Blue Earth River near Mankato. He watched a giant grain elevator make its way across a tiny, narrow bridge above the Rapidan Dam. We're talking about this today because that young boy is now all grown up and living in Rochester. He still has vivid childhood memories of watching that 6-story elevator cross the nearly 90-foot tall dam. So he got in touch and wanted to know, just how did they do it? So I asked reporter J.P. Lawrence to look into this for us, and he covers southwest Minnesota. He took a deep dive into the rich history and incredible logistics of moving this grain elevator. Thanks for being here, J.P.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, before we get into the details of this amazing move, tell me a little bit more about the area. What's it like?
Rapidan is just this beautiful area. It's about 8 miles south of Mankato, about 85 miles south of the cities. There's the cornfields and the soybean fields. But my girlfriend and I, we went out to Rapidan for the strawberry moon. We went out to find this darkened field so we can see this beautiful, rare moon that was shining across the river valley. So we drove past the grain bin in town, and we went to the soybean field. And there were just so many fireflies just flitting around in the darkness. There was just this bird that kept whooping at us, and we couldn't tell what it was, but we still have a recording of it. And we drove through these rolling valleys that they have around Rapidan, where there was these sheets of fog in the night, like horizontal sheets of fog before heading home. This is a beautiful area. It's cornfields and soybean fields and rolling hills and trees and nature.
I love it. You make me want to go there. That's awesome. Well, I'd love it if you could set the scene for us. So it's a lovely day in August 1949. Let's imagine that you're Jim standing near the Rapidan Dam. What would you have seen?
It would have been quite the sight. Imagine this. There's a crowd of 2,000 people, and this is rural Minnesota decades ago. You see the kids gathered there, the mothers carrying babies, the fathers, they've got this Panama hat on. And in the background, it looks like this tiny bridge across this river valley. And there's just 6-story, 40-ton building, kind of precariously, it seems like, going across the bridge. And I think, when I saw the photos of that, and I assume, the people back then, it must have seemed like, what's going on here? How could this possibly happen?
Yeah, I'm imagining, too, this feeling of it could tip over at any minute, and what will happen?
Of the 2,000 people there must have been some percentage of people who wanted some kind of mayhem to happen.
You can imagine the live streams and reels and prediction markets happening if this were taking place today.
Yeah, totally.
Well, you touched on this a little bit, but you're talking about something that happened 75 years ago, or actually more than 75 years ago. How did you learn some of these details?
The crazy thing is so many of the people who were children at the time, it remains a formative, vivid memory 70 plus years later. I talked to a bunch of them, and there's a historian, Jane Holla, who has a lot of photos and other things that she kept over the years about this place.
Very cool. So the elevator moved 8 miles from the town of Cray to Rapidan, and I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about these places. I'd heard of Rapidan because of the dam, but Cray's a place I don't know anything about.
Yeah. Cray is interesting because at the beginning of Minnesota's history, there's all of these places that wanted to be, cities and towns. And the towns we see on the map today are the survivors, but some places didn't make it. Cray was one of them. They had high hopes when they founded it. It was the early 1900s. They had a creamery at one point, they had a train stop, and they built this grain elevator, but it just never got used. So when the town of Rapidan, they needed a grain elevator, they had a grain elevator, and then it just burned down in this horrific fire.
Oh, wow.
So they had this unused one in the town one over.
That's so interesting. I was curious about why they moved it instead of building a new one. Was moving something this large like a common occurrence at this time?
The company that owned the grain elevator, Hubbard and Miller, they own about 40 grain elevators just all around Mankato. They decided it would be cheaper to move the existing structure, and there was people who specialized in this. The guy that they hired, his name was William Reese from Thief River Falls. That was his job. He specialized in moving grain elevators.
Got it. So in order to move this, what were the steps that they took?
So it was a big lift. You're talking a 40-ton, six-story building, and you got to move it across 8 miles of cornfields and a big river in the middle of it. It took a little bit of time. They began preparing the elevator about a month and a half before the move. So what he did was they took the building and they balanced it on 24 wheels. And this was after World War II, so they had a heavy-duty old Army truck. And they dragged it across these lesser-used gravel roads to avoid traffic. And this building, it was so tall, they had to take down power and telephone lines as they went across the cornfields.
That sounds pretty dangerous, actually.
They're being very careful. It was about 5 miles from Cray to get to the river. And that 5 miles, it took them about 3 or 4 days because, again, they were going through, the back roads, the gravel roads that were kind of out of the way, and they had to be taking down power and telephone lines along the way.
That's amazing. So this is a 6-story grain elevator. It's hard to imagine. Can you help me picture it?
So imagine a skyscraper, but it's just all wood timbers all the way up. At the very top of it, it looks like almost like a penthouse log cabin on top of this skyscraper of wood timbers. You go in, and there's just this huge cavernous opening where you would put your grain, you put your corn, and that's where it dries. That's where you keep it away from moisture. And when it's going down the road, it kind of reminds me of, when an ant is picking up like a gigantic leaf? Seeing this truck carrying this 6-story, 40-ton wooden skyscraper, it kind of reminds me of an ant carrying a gigantic leaf that's way bigger than it.
That is amazing. Okay, so it took days, but then they did reach the most dramatic part of the journey, the dam crossing, and that's the moment that young Jim Miner still remembers. We're going to get into that after the break. What if your money could do more? At credit unions, it stays local, helping Minnesota families buy homes, start businesses, and build stronger communities. Your money grows here, and Minnesota grows stronger too. It's a credit union thing. Scroll, search, or ask your favorite AI. Credit unions near me.
Hey, I'm Melissa Townsend, and I'm the host of the podcast Essential Minnesota. Each week on the show, local journalists from the Minnesota Star Tribune take a deep dive into one big story happening right here at home. Episodes drop every Friday. That's Essential Minnesota.
We're back, but before we continue our conversation, I wanted to tell you that this podcast is produced by Melissa Townsend and the music is by Matt Gilmer. Okay, so tell us what happened when the giant elevator arrived at the Rapidan Dam.
All right, so it's a summer day in 1949. William Reese from Thief River Falls, the guy who's been moving this 40-ton, 65-foot-tall grain elevator across the cornfields, it's been 3 or 4 days of that, traveling 5 miles from Cray, and they have now arrived at the Rapidan Dam. So there's this bridge across the Blue Earth River, and they have to bring this grain bin all the way across this narrow 2-lane county road. And then after that, they have to bring it up this 100-foot-tall hill up on the other side of the riverbank once they cross it. So this was the most dramatic part of the journey.
Wow, and how did they do it? They were able to just drive with the big army truck?
So the bridge had these 5-foot railings on either side. So what they would have to do is they jacked up the whole structure so it could be over the top of that 5-foot railing. and then they were just pulling it across slowly as 2,000 people were watching to see if everything all went falling into the river like Jenga blocks.
Like Jenga blocks, so scary. And I know that our own newspaper covered this back in the day, and I took a look at some of the photos that were taken. When you looked at them, what were you thinking?
When you look at the big, gigantic grain bin on the bridge, it kind of hangs over the sides a bit. That's kind of scary when you see it. It kind of looks like if there was like a stiff breeze, like the whole thing would topple. But, slowly they got it over the bridge. Then they had to bring it up the riverbank, and that was the hard one.
What did they have to do then?
So they get across the bridge. There's a huge hill. It's 104 feet up, and they can't have the elevator tip. You can't have it tip over as you're going up the hill. So what they would do is they had 4 or 5 additional trucks. It's not just the one Army truck anymore. They're pulling that grain elevator up. It would be a foot at a time. The elevator goes up. They lift the whole structure to put some additional pallets to make sure everything is still like level. Another foot, repeat the process, put in more support so the elevator never tips over, and then just repeat the process over and over again until you're at the top of the hill.
That is crazy.
They had to anchor the structure to trees when they got to the top.
Were there moments, did anything you read or learn, did they feel like they would need to give up at any point?
I haven't seen it. I think there was people that I talked to, they were worried as they watched it as kids. But if William Reese from Fife Falls thought the whole thing was going to topple over and go into the Blue Earth River, I haven't read anything of him saying that.
Wow.
And then also, I went to the grain elevator. It's still there. It's in the middle of Rapidan.
Wow.
I found where it was, knocked on the door, and it's a operating grain bin. I talked to the people there, and they let me in. They let me into this. It was built in 1906, and I was still able to get into it in 2025. And you go in, and the original wood timbers are there. You can see the place where the grain is kept. It's still right there if anyone wanted to see a part of local history in Blue Earth County.
That's very cool. So that whole area where the bridge was looks totally different now, right?
Yes. This was probably my second week at the Star Tribune, covering, Southwest Minnesota, including Mankato. That was when we had the big floods that overflowed the banks and scoured the sides of the Rapidan Dam. That was an incredible time to see the river with all of its power just scrape away, huge swaths of land. There was this local landmark, the Rapidan Dam store, decades there. Everyone loved it. And the mighty power of nature just scooped out the cliffs on either side of the river and just dragged him in. I remember there was a press conference with the sheriff, and a week later, the ground where we were asking these questions had just gone into the river.
Wow.
So, yeah, the landscape is completely different. And I was talking to Jane Holla, who is the historian for Blue Earth County, and she was among the crowds who had gathered to see the riverbank get scoured away during the floods. And she was talking to me about, the awe that people felt as they watched this gigantic grain elevator go across the river. And she said that, she probably felt a similar sense of awe and fear seeing, these things bigger than us as humans completely reshape the landscape of that valley.
Yeah, that is really interesting to think about. What's going to happen? Are they building a new dam, or how's it going to look moving forward?
With all the damage from the floods in 2024, the plan is to start removing the Rapidan Dam in 2027, and that's going to cost anywhere from 60 to 75 million.
Wow. Was there anything else that stood out to you or surprised you as you were working to answer this one?
One of the things that surprised me the most was because the grain elevator is still there, that I could go and, see this piece of history. And I talked to the local historians, I talked to the people at the grain elevator. It's such a vivid piece of history for them But for most people, it's just another grain bin. It's another thing that they see on the side of the road and don't give any second thoughts to.
I think I know what you mean, because it's like it was a feat that was so amazing. So it's very cool.
I mean, it was just after World War II. Like, the whole country was developing and things were getting built and things were getting moved around, and just monumental feats of construction were happening all the time. And we kind of take that for granted. It's just crazy how much we've developed over the years, and we kind of take it for granted these days.
This is just a great example of why I love Curious Minnesota so much, because this moment in the state's history, you really can talk to folks who were there as kids and share their memories. It's really a special one.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you so much, JP. This has been a fascinating episode. And thanks to Jim in Rochester, who was curious about the day the grain elevator went across that tiny bridge over the Rapidan Dam. And that is it for us today. You can read all of our Curious Minnesota stories online at startribune.com. And I'm hoping that this inspired you to send us a question. Send an email and share what you're curious about to curious@startribune.com. And in the meantime, stay curious.